Hey, what's up, everybody? Shark here, coming back at you guys with another LCS player tier list. This time, we're going to be looking at the junglers in the LCS. This will be as of week 9, at the end of week 9, the summer split. So, right before the playoffs are set to begin today, August 13th. So, with this list, we're going to be looking at players who have 6 or more games. So, I'm leaving out players like Medios and Fragus, who only played between 2 and 6 games. Also Acadian, he'll be on this tier list as well. And evaluating jungler is going to be different than evaluating laners because it's not necessarily a one-to-one role like it is with especially solo laners. So team play performance overall does play a bit into this, but for the most part, we'll be looking at how they control the early game as well as how they play in team fights later on, setting up run objectives, all that kind of good stuff. So let's get into this. And the first player that we have is Closer. So Closer is a very good early game aggressive and mechanical jungler. Let's see. So one thing with him is he did have to deal with with switching mid laners 1 week actually before the split started. Demonte confirmed that on Hotline League because they were going to swap out Golden Glue. That was confirmed, but then Blaze Olive was supposed to be the replacement for Golden Glue, but then they brought in Demonte for tryouts and they ended up going with him. I think that was a good decision overall because I think Demonte does fit the style of the team really well. He is 0-4 on Nidalee, who was a metal jungler at the beginning of the split. Still viable, but fell off as the split went on. I don't think it's necessarily his fault why he's winless on Nidalee. He's had some really good performances on the champion, especially in one of the first games versus TL, where I think he actually flame horizoned Broxah in the jungle with that early invade, forcing Broxah to flash, and then when Broxah went for that mid gank and it failed, it just sent him behind for the whole game, and essentially Broxah was relegated to a pillar bot on Trundle at that point. I think he has really good synergy with his laners, and his team does play around him very well. Golden Guardians plays pretty similarly to Cloud9 in the sense that they try to enable their jungler and their laners try to enable their jungler. Golden Guardians is some of the best at 15 stats with gold lead and everything else in the league. So I think Closer is in the conversation definitely for top 3 jungler. I would say top 2. I don't think he's the best jungler in the LCS, but I think he's definitely up there, and he's a dark horse MVP candidate in my opinion. I'd say he's A tier. Next up we have Santorin. Another jungler who has performed very well this split, and it shows in FlyQuest's overall record as they finished 3rd in the spring split. I think he's a bit different than Closer and Blabber, where he's more of the control style jungler, really good at playing around his lanes and enabling his laners, especially like Power of Evil is one that he he helps him in the early game and helps him get going so that he can be that late game carry for the team. Has good synergy with Ignar when he roams. He just has a really good feel for the game. I feel like his ganks generally always end well, either with like a kill or a summoner burn. He's also, I would say, the troll king of NA. His Trundle is super good. He's also just really good at like the Cinder Hulk beefy boy junglers like Volibear as well. A couple of things to note: he's 2nd in KDA for junglers, and he is 3rd in kills. Overall, I think he's at a really good split. I think he's definitely a top 3 jungler in NA. I think he's just a step below Closer, just because Closer can play a bit more mechanically intensive champions better than Santorin, but Santorin I think is definitely an A tier jungler for me. Next up we got Blabber, the spring split LCS MVP. Blabber at the beginning of the split was doing exactly what he was doing in spring to everybody. He was dumping on kids. There's nobody even close to him in terms of, just his command of the early game and command of the jungle. Cloud9 started to slip a little bit. I think it's mainly because control mages kind of reared their ugly head again. I shouldn't say ugly, but they reared their head again. And that meant Niski needed to basically stay in lane and farm up a lot of times. Had to play things like Azir and Orianna that can't necessarily get as much push as something like Galio or like Zoe or some of the other TF. Some of those champions that are really good at roaming and kind of working with the jungler to impact other lanes. I think that's where Blabber's performance overall started to slip a little bit, but I think he's still the best jungler in NA. He leads all junglers in kills by 17 over in that closer's next closest person. He's first in kills, gold diff and experience diff, as well as CSD at 10 minutes. Cloud9 really enables him, and the team does play around him quite effectively. I mean, not so much towards the end of the split, but through the first 9 games, they're definitely doing that when they're 9-0. I guess a few notes about him is his playstyle can be a double-edged sword for the team. He is very aggressive, and he pushes the envelope sometimes. Works out. He looks like a god, and nobody can stop him. Other times, it's like he ints some things, and he needs to reel it back a little bit. But just very good carry-style jungler, and I think his Olaf. Well, I think Olaf has been must-ban, but when you get Blabber Olaf, it's kind of like a 1v9 show, and it seems like the early game is just pretty much lost at that point. And then when Cloud9 has a lead, they typically, don't squander it. So he is S tier for me because I do think he is a step above Closer and Santorin still. So, I still think Blabber is the best jungler in NA for the summer split as well. Next up, we have Broxah. Broxah, I think, has been a bit disappointing to me just because of the hype surrounding him in the preseason, as well as just his accomplishments in general throughout the years. I mean, he's a 3-time Worlds quarterfinalist. He reached, World Finals. He's a semifinalist as well. And back in 2018, realize it's 2 years ago now, he looked like one of the best junglers in the whole entire world. Like his Lee tore up Worlds and everything else. So, I mean, I honestly expected him to just smurf on kids. I expected him to be possibly the best jungler in NA, and he hasn't quite lived up to that. He's used to be more of an aggressive and gank heavy jungler back in Europe. But now he's turning more of a passive and controlled style jungler in NA. He could play the mechanical jungler as well, but it doesn't seem to translate to the stage as much as I would have thought. It seems like he's changed his style coming over to NA. He has the highest KDA among junglers, but he does have the lowest damage output, and it's by a pretty wide margin compared to some of the other ones. I mean, it's at about 11%, whereas other junglers are around 15 to 20. One thing I gotta talk about is that Graves game where he was 0-0-0 at 30 minutes. I mean, that's just weird to me that a jungler wouldn't be involved in any of the kills up until that point. Because I mean, it's not that hard to even just get an assist in a team fight or in the game. I mean, you just have to land an ability that does damage, or I think even just interacts with a champion in some way on the enemy team that dies. And it's just weird to me that the jungler of all people wouldn't have participated in a kill. I think he is middle of the pack to below average, I would say, in LCS. I think he's middle of the pack for me just because one thing with TL is he's fitting around the mold of the team, which is don't make mistakes early, scale up, and then just win because you're better than the enemy team. So, I mean, I don't even know if the team necessarily wants him to go crazy and aggressive. And, I mean, they're 15-3. They got the first overall seed in LCS, and I think they're just got to win one best of 5 to make Worlds. So, I mean, I can't knock it too much because, like I said, I think he's just playing around what the team needs him to do, but he hasn't really impressed me too much one way or the other. So, I'm putting him top of C tier. I think there are a couple junglers who have been performing better than him on an individual level and doing more for their teams. But, Broxah, I'm looking for him to turn it up in the playoffs and potentially Worlds, because I do think TL is going to go to Worlds. So um, next up we have Dardoch. Dardoch had an unfortunate spring split with TSM, where I had high expectations for him. I was excited. I am a Dardoch fan. I do like players like him who are aggressive mechanical players who like talk smack and try and back it up on the Rift. I think it's always interesting to have in the league. But yeah, he was on a lot of Sejuani and J4 duty in spring, which is pretty typical for TSM junglers. But he's an aggressive jungler. He's a carry style jungler. He was good at all the meta champions that were around for summer. So he had like the Graves. His Graves is very good. Historically, has been very good. Lee Sin, Nidalee. He enabled more aggression and playmaking overall out of Dig, which is something they were lacking when they started 06 and actually started 08 in the summer split. He is third in damage per minute among junglers, which I think is a good stat, because typically like the junglers are going to get most of their damage off in the early game, so it starts to fall off a little bit towards the late when the AD carry and laners start interacting more in team fights. I just think like he was a great addition to the Dig team, because they were doing nothing in the first like 6 to 8 games, and I think once they started playing around Dardoch a little bit more, that's when they started to find success, and they actually ended up making the playoffs. I mean, because I don't think Phoenix had a particularly great split, and then Viper and Lorelo were just okay. They weren't anything too special. So I'm honestly gonna put Dardoch B tier. I don't think he's quite had. I mean, he hasn't had a number of games that Closer and Saturn have had, and I think like he's just below them as well. And I mean, he doesn't have the strongest like laners and active team either. So I think like B tier is definitely fair for him. So next up we have Contracts. Contracts came in for Meteos in the 7th game of the split, and he's looked really good, honestly, since he's come back. I think he's brought some fresh air, brought some life back in 100 Thieves, who were in a very similar boat to Dig, where they just weren't doing anything as a team. Someday was doing his best, and Cody's son, I mean, he had to deal with Stunt dying like 9 times a game on Nautilus, so that wasn't helping. So really, there was one player who was, staying afloat, and that was Someday, but the rest of the team was really struggling. And I think Meteos' style didn't really fit the team, at least not for this split. And I think like Meteos also wasn't super proficient at the meta junglers either. Contracts he's very good at the carry style jungle champions, Graves, Lee Sin, Nidalee. And his Olaf performance against Cloud9 was like really good. I thought like he played the champion about as well as one could. Super aggressive, just going at people. I think they had a Yumi that game as well, so he was getting sped up, and or Karma maybe. I think it was Olaf Karma, but he was getting sped up by something, and like he would just destroy Cloud9. At the time, that was an accomplishment. Now when they went 4 and 5 at the back end of the split, not so much, but I mean he still did, outplayed Blabber there, which is definitely commendable. He has the highest damage share among junglers. That's also something to note. And he's also played really well, despite having a weak mid laner in Ryoma. So I think he's had a great split. I think he's been better than Dardoch overall. But again, he hasn't played a number of games, and I think Blabber, Closer, and Santorin still a step above him overall. Next up, we have Sven, the Summer Split 2019 MVP. He hasn't had a great split at all. EG has been very volatile in terms of what their lineup was and just changing things up midway. I thought he had really good synergy with Jizuke back in spring, but Jizuke was super coin flip again at the beginning of summer. And I don't know. It seems like he was trying to force things that weren't there. And one other thing to note with him, too, is he did lead the LCS in deaths. But typically he was playing a lot of Cinder Hall style junglers. I believe he had the most games on set which that champion's going to be right in there, right in the fray. So he's generally going to get either blown up or, just he's basically the front line of the team, so he's soaking up the most damage. So I don't know. I can't fault him too much, I guess, if he's just the primary engage of the team and he's dying. But again, it's kind of night and day between summer this year, summer last year. Um, in general, too, one thing I can't knock him for is his lanes weren't especially great. I mean, like, Hooney was pushing up, but Hooney did not play well. Hasn't played well, I think, this split. Golden Glue, middle of the pack mid laner. I mean, plays control mages fairly well, farms up, does that kind of thing, but he's not really one to like get a solo kill in lane, create an advantage for himself, really create advantage at all. In the bot lane, I felt like was just kind of there. So I think he's good at like supportive and like carry junglers as well. He can kind of play it all. He had a really good Kindred this split. I think he had the best Kindred of anybody, especially in that game against TL where they ran the Volibear and Kindred combo. But I think he's had a down split. I think he's been more of the 7 to 10 kind of jungler for me overall. But I don't know. Maybe they can turn up in playoffs, but for me, Sven's at a kind of a rough split. Next up, Xmithie. Xmithie is one of the best junglers, NA-born junglers in LCS history. He's a control style jungler, but can occasionally pick up those carry style champions. But I consider him more like the Sejuani, J4, that kind of champion. A lot of the Cinderhulk champion players, plays good all off and all that. But he isn't necessarily known for his mechanics at this point anymore. But he's very good in that controlled style, playing around his laners, playing for his laners, playing for objectives. I think he just has very good knowledge of the game, just in terms of like where he seems to know where enemy junglers are going to be. I just think this split in IMT, he's had considerably weaker laners than he's ever had before. I mean, he's been on like CLG during their prime, TL the past 2 years before this one, and IMT previously with the Hooney, Pope Belter, and Cody Sun and Ole lineup. So I think like it's been a complete like 180 for him, complete change of pace. But overall, like he seems to have a lack of motivation. That I've heard that behind the scenes with him as well. I think he's kind of in the same boat as Sven. He's had a rough split, but I'll cut him a little bit of slack just because like I don't think he's gonna be the one to like pull IMT together. He's C tier for me. I think just because he's been a bit less inconsistent than Sven. I'm gonna put him above him, but I just think like Xmithie, if he would have joined TSM, I think he would have been a good fit for that team, because I think that team just needed a veteran voice to kind of help command the team, pull all the strong voices together, and just kind of be a glue piece. But IMT, I don't think it was the right team for him. But overall, about C tier jungler for me this split. All right, last two. So we got Spika. Spika has not had a good split. This guy, I do feel for him because he's a really young player. He's 18 years old, and he's already been through the ringer in some very high pressure, hot seat situations basically since he started. I mean, like, this guy had to come in with the jungle issues they had last summer with like Acadian and Greg just both being benched, and then he had to hop into the playoffs and Worlds Gauntlet, which I don't think it's a great start for anybody, man. Like that, I feel for him there. And then after Dardoch got kicked, now Spika's in again. I don't think he was quite ready. I mean, he wasn't set up for success either when they picked him Kane first game. Like, that was just troll. He's had one of the few bad Olaf games, and really bad Olaf games I've seen this split. I mean, he has strong lanes to play to. I mean, he has Bjergsen, he has Broken Blade, and he has Double Lifts. All three have been great in the past. Good laners and just good players. You think it'd be pretty easy to play around that and get advantages in the jungle, but I mean, he's on the lower end of the XP and gold differences at 10, and with those laners, he just really hasn't taken any command of the jungle or early game, and I feel like TSM's just kind of operating with their laners, and they're just scaling for late, and then just winning because they have better players. That's pretty much been TSM's MO. I don't think Spika has really done much. For me, I believe he is the worst jungler this split, and I'll explain why he is. I think he is below Wiggly. So let's get into Wiggly. Wiggly just lost this split, and I'll give him slack over Spika because like CLG was a pretty dysfunctional team, and his laners weren't especially easy to play to because they, in my opinion, except Ruin, who has not had a good split, like with where I put him on my top lane tier list. Pobelter is that kind of like a Golden Glue-esque player where like he's decent in lane, he won't lose too hard, good team fighter, but like early game, he's just kind of there in my opinion. And Stixay and Xmithie, pretty much same deal. I mean, not doing a whole heck of a lot early game. So I'll give him a little bit of slack there, but Wiggly's in the same boat as Spika. I don't think he played well, like, at all. I'm putting him as the 9th jungler in the LCS because CLG as a whole wasn't very good, and I think Wiggly was just overall one of the worst parts of that team. I definitely predict that CLG will blow things up. Maybe only keep Pobelter. I think he's pretty much the only piece that's worth keeping at this point. And I think they're just going to move on from this roster, unfortunately. Unfortunately for them, but I think it's probably the best course for the team. All right, so that wraps up the NALCS Jungler Summer Split 2020 tier list. If you have any comments below on any of the placings of these players, whether you agree or disagree, please feel free to let me know in the comments section below. And if you did like this video, hey, please feel free to leave a like. Mid lane is up next, so if you want to be notified of when that comes up, please consider subscribing as well. I thank you guys for watching and hope you all have a good one. Shark out. Bye.